I'm sitting in my living room this morning, looking at the empty chair where my wife used to sit every evening, and I keep hearing her voice. Not the way she sounded those last few days in the hospital, weak and struggling for breath, but the way she sounded when she said the words that shattered everything I thought I knew about our life together. 5 words that made me realize I'd spent 45 years chasing the wrong things. I'm Richard, and I'm 78 years old. And 3 months ago, as my wife Margaret was dying, she looked me in the eye and said, "I wish you'd stayed home." Not "I love you" or "take care of yourself" or any of the gentle goodbyes you'd expect. Just those 5 words that have haunted me every day since. Let me tell you what she meant, because it took me 45 years to understand what I'd been too busy to see. Margaret and I met in 1975 when we were both 25. I was working as a salesman for a medical supply company, and she was a nurse at the county hospital. I'd stop by her floor every few weeks to check on orders, and she always had time to chat, always made me feel like I was the most interesting person she'd talk to all day. She was beautiful, but not in the obvious way. Margaret had this quiet warmth about her, this way of making everyone around her feel seen and valued. When she smiled at me, really smiled, it felt like the sun coming out from behind clouds. We got married in 1976, and I thought I was the luckiest man alive. We bought a little house on Maple Street, and Margaret made it into a home with curtains she sewed herself and plants she nursed from cuttings. She could make a house feel welcoming with nothing but her presence and a pot of coffee on the stove. Our son David was born in 1978, and our daughter Susan came along in 1981. Margaret took a few years off from nursing to stay home with them, and watching her with those babies was like watching magic happen. She had this way of making even the ordinary moments, bath time, bedtime stories, Saturday morning pancakes, feel special. I should have been paying attention. I should have been present for those moments. But I was already getting restless, already convinced that providing for my family meant being somewhere else, doing something more important than just being home. In 1982, I got an offer to join a larger company with better territory and higher commissions. It meant more travel, maybe 3 or 4 days a week on the road instead of the occasional day trips I'd been doing. Margaret didn't complain when I took the job. She just asked if I was sure it was what I wanted, and when I said yes, she supported me like she always did. That's when the pattern started. I'd be gone Monday through Thursday, driving to hospitals and clinics across 3 states, building relationships with purchasing managers and department heads. I was good at my job, maybe great at it. I could walk into any hospital and within 6 months have them buying exclusively from my company. The money was good, and it kept getting better. By the mid-1980s, I was making more than most of my friends, more than Margaret would have made if she'd gone back to nursing. I told myself I was building security for our family, creating opportunities for our kids that I'd never had growing up. But what I was really doing was using work as an excuse to avoid the messy, difficult, wonderful work of being a husband and father. When I was home on weekends, I was tired from the road, tired from the constant sales presentations, tired from living in hotel rooms and eating restaurant food 4 days a week. Margaret would try to tell me about David's soccer game or Susan's school play, and I'd half listen while reading the paper or watching TV. I told myself I was recharging so I could work harder the next week. Really, I was checking out because being present with my family required a different kind of energy than I knew how to give. The kids grew up with me as a weekend visitor in their own house. I missed most of David's baseball games, most of Susan's dance recitals, most of the parent-teacher conferences that Margaret handled alone. When I was home, I was the fun parent who took them to the movies or bought them toys, while Margaret was the one who helped with homework and enforced bedtime and dealt with the daily realities of raising children. I convinced myself that this division of labor made sense. I was the breadwinner, she was the homemaker. I was building our financial future, she was handling everything else. It seemed fair to me, even logical. But fair and logical aren't the same thing as right. and I was too busy being successful to notice what my choices were costing my family. In the 1990s, my company promoted me to regional manager. More money, more responsibility, and yes, more travel. Now I was on the road sometimes 5 days a week, managing other salespeople across an even wider territory. Margaret went back to nursing part-time when Susan started middle school, and suddenly she was working her own job and still handling everything at home. When I'd call from hotel rooms in the evening, she'd give me updates about the kids' lives like she was reporting to an absent landlord. David was struggling with math. Susan had made the honor roll. The dishwasher was making a funny noise. The neighbor's dog had gotten into our garbage again. I listened to these reports and felt like I was staying connected to my family's life. Really, I was just getting a summary of a story I wasn't actually part of. The kids stopped expecting me to be at their events. When David graduated from high school in 1996, he didn't seem surprised that I had to miss his graduation party because I was at a company conference in Atlanta. When Susan got accepted to college, she called Margaret first, not me. I told myself that they understood. I told myself that they were proud of how hard I worked, how successful I'd become. Really, they were just adapting to having a father who was physically present maybe 2 days a week and emotionally present even less than that. Margaret never complained, not directly anyway. Sometimes she'd mention that other husbands coached their kids' teams or that other wives had help with household projects. But she never made demands, never gave ultimatums, never forced me to choose between work and family. I think now that she was afraid if she pushed, I'd choose work. And maybe she was right to be afraid. At the time, I probably would have. In 2001, when I was 51, my company offered me the job I'd been working toward for 25 years, National Sales Director. It meant relocating to Chicago, traveling even more, and making more money than I'd ever imagined when I started selling medical supplies. Margaret and I had our only real fight about that job. She didn't want to leave the town where we'd raised our kids, didn't want to start over in a city where we didn't know anyone. The kids were in college, but they still came home for holidays and summers. Our house was paid off. She had friends, a job she liked, a life that made sense to her. But I wanted that promotion. I'd been climbing toward it for decades, and I couldn't imagine turning it down. So I wore her down with logic. The salary increase would let us save more for retirement. The kids were grown anyway. We could travel together when I wasn't working. It would be an adventure. Margaret gave in like she always did. We sold the house on Maple Street and moved to Chicago. She took early retirement rather than try to find a new job, and for the first time in our marriage, she was financially dependent on me completely. The next 15 years were the most successful of my career and the loneliest of my marriage. I traveled constantly, managed sales teams across the entire country, and made more money than I knew what to spend. Margaret tried to build a life in Chicago, but she never really settled there. She missed her friends, missed having purpose beyond being my wife, missed the life we'd left behind. I told myself she'd adjust. I told myself that once I retired, we'd have time to reconnect, time to enjoy all the security I'd built for us. I kept setting target dates. When I turned 60, when I turned 65, when the company restructured, when the market improved. There was always a reason to work a little longer, travel a little more, chase one more promotion or bonus or recognition. Margaret developed what we thought was pneumonia in December of last year. But the pneumonia wouldn't clear up, and more tests revealed lung cancer that had already spread. She'd never smoked a day in her life, but sometimes cancer just happens, the doctor said. Sometimes you don't get the time you thought you had. The treatment was aggressive and awful, chemotherapy that made her sick for days at a time, radiation that left her exhausted and burned. I took leave from work to be with her, the first extended time I'd been home in decades. Being her caregiver forced me to really look at Margaret for the first time in years. I saw how thin she'd gotten, how quiet she'd become, how she'd learned to live her life around the edges of mine. I saw a woman who'd spent 45 years accommodating a man who was always about to come home, always about to have time for her, always about to prioritize her needs. In those last weeks, when she was too sick for chemotherapy and too weak to leave the hospital, we finally had conversations we should have had decades earlier. She told me about the years she'd felt lonely in our marriage. She told me about friends' husbands who'd coached their kids' teams, who'd taken family vacations, who'd been present for the daily small moments that actually make up a life. She told me she'd always felt like she was married to a man who was perpetually about to arrive but never actually there. I tried to apologize. I tried to explain about providing for the family, about building security, about all the reasons I'd thought my choices were right. Margaret just looked at me with those tired eyes and said, "Richard, we had enough money after the first 10 years. We didn't need more money. We needed you." She died on a Tuesday morning in March. I was holding her hand, finally present for one of the most important moments of our life together. As she was slipping away, she squeezed my hand and said those 5 words that have echoed in my head every day since: "I wish you'd stayed home," not "I wish you'd traveled less," or "I wish you'd worked less," or "I wish you'd been different." Just, "I wish you'd stayed home." Like home was a place I'd visited instead of a place I'd lived. Like our life together was something I'd observed from a distance instead of something I'd actually experienced. She was right. I had been a tourist in my own family's life for 45 years. After the funeral, I moved back to our old town. I couldn't stay in Chicago. That city belonged to my career, not to my actual life. I bought a small house 3 blocks from where we used to live on Maple Street, close enough to see the tree in the front yard that Margaret had planted when David was born. I retired completely. At 78, I have more money saved than I could spend in 2 lifetimes, and nothing I really want to spend it on. David and Susan are kind to me, but we don't have the relationship that fathers and children should have. They love me, I think, but they don't really know me. How could they? I was never there long enough for them to get to know me. I volunteer at the hospital where Margaret used to work, the same hospital where we met 48 years ago. I read to patients, help with meal service, do the small tasks that make people feel less alone. It's the first work I've ever done that feels like it matters more than the paycheck. The nurses there remind me of Margaret, the way they pay attention to patients, the way they remember small details that make people feel seen. I watch them and think about all the ways Margaret tried to teach me how to be present, how to notice, how to care about the person right in front of me, instead of always focusing on the next goal, the next achievement, the next place I needed to be. Here's what I learned too late. Success isn't what you accumulate, it's what you pay attention to. I accumulated money, status, professional recognition, and I missed everything that actually mattered. I was so busy providing for my family's financial future that I forgot to show up for their emotional present. Margaret didn't need a bigger house or fancier vacations or a husband who could afford expensive restaurants. She needed a husband who came home at dinner time, who listened to her stories about her day, who was interested in the small details of their children's lives. She needed someone who chose to be there, not someone who was always about to be there once the next deal was closed, or the next promotion was earned, or the next goal was achieved. I spent 45 years believing that love was about providing and achieving and building security for the future. Margaret tried to teach me that love is about presence and attention and showing up for the ordinary moments that actually make up a life. I was too busy being successful to learn that lesson while she was alive to benefit from it. If you're young and building a career, if you're climbing toward goals that seem important, if you're telling yourself that once you achieve enough success, you'll have time for the relationships that matter, let me tell you something. Margaret never got to say to me directly, there is no amount of success that will compensate for being absent from your own life. Your children won't remember how much money you made or how impressive your job title was. They'll remember whether you were there for their baseball games, whether you listened to their problems, whether you chose them over whatever else was competing for your attention. Your spouse won't be impressed by your dedication to your career if that dedication comes at the expense of your dedication to your marriage. They'll remember whether you were present for conversations, whether you prioritized their needs, whether you treated your relationship like it was the most important thing in your life, or just another item on your to-do list. I wish I could go back and stay home more. I wish I could choose differently, choose presence over productivity, choose my family's daily reality over my own professional dreams. But all I can do now is tell you that Margaret was right. We did have enough money after the first 10 years. We didn't need more success. We needed more of me. Don't spend 45 years learning what I learned too late. Your work will replace you the day you retire. Your family can't replace the years you missed while you were building a career that ultimately mattered to no one but you. If this story makes you think about your own choices between work and family, I'd love to hear from you. Share this with someone who might need to hear that being present is more valuable than being productive. And tell me in the comments, what would the people you love most want you to choose differently? Sometimes the most successful life is the one where you stay home.